Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Harris. My wife, Uganda Harris.
Well,
We're going to make a hopefully quick video to put across some information with regard to Juneteenth. This is something that we would wish that we had a number of years ago, something that we are hoping we can pass to our younger family members so that the extent of their Juneteenth understanding, knowledge, and awareness does not end at it's just Freedom Day. Want to highlight a number of the historical matters surrounding the Juneteenth initial holiday and at least give it some sort of context so we can see what did and didn't affect this now holiday that's been made federal. So I'll let my wife start and then I'll jump in from time to time and hopefully you are blessed and informed.
hey, everybody. So we're just going to start off talking about how the Confederacy seceded in 1860, from 1860 to 1861. That included 11 Southern states that seceded, which means they became independent. They broke off from the U.S. to form their own union. So they broke off from the Union. 11 states were called, those 11 states were called the Confederate, which are allies, leagues, conspirators, the Confederate States of America, instead of the United States of America. The president of those Confederate States, was the Commander-in-Chief Jefferson Davis. 23 states remained with the Northern Union, the United States, and the Civil War was from around late 1860 to 1865.
Okay, so 1860 to 1865 was a civil war within our own borders. We've got the Northern Union and obviously the northern part of the U.S. and in the southern part of the U.S. were the Confederate states that seceded, became independent. And as a matter of setting some things in place, the then President Abraham Lincoln, he set up a type of understanding. He gave an executive order that would free the slaves from the Confederate States. And this executive order was actually issued September 22nd of 1862, but it went in effect on January 1st of 1863. So the night before January 1st, 1863, that's to say New Year's Eve, for a number of slaves and African Americans is what we call watch night. And that's why we have a watch night tradition that's observed even in 2022. But like I said, on the morning, the day of January 1st, 1863, this executive order or the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. And the Emancipation Proclamation contained a number of items. One of those items was that the leadership and the US government, the military even, was to regard listed Confederate states as rebels against the United States or against the Northern Union. And if you'll check out the Emancipation Proclamation, you'll see that they list these states. I won't list them here. They list 10, 11-ish. One of those is my favorite state, but my favorite state is only my favorite state because we are not living in that time. The Emancipation Proclamation listed these Confederate states, these Southern states, as rebels, and this may be part of where we get the term Southern rebel. These Emancipation Proclamation would list the declared freedom of slaves in the listed Confederate states only. Like it listed those states and said that those that were enslaved in those states would be free by way of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation also encouraged nonviolence of newly freed slaves, newly freed peoples, except of course in instances where self-defense would mandate that they would have to be violent to get free. The Emancipation Proclamation encouraged newly freed people to get a job for reasonable pay. And the Emancipation Proclamation would also publish an intent for the Army and the Navy to accept the enlistment and accept the involvement of African Americans into the military service. So that's one of the military highlights therein. And then the end of the Emancipation Proclamation admitted that the Emancipation Proclamation itself was an act of justice and an act of military necessity. Whenever you start to dig into some of the historical factors around the Emancipation Proclamation, you'll find that President Abraham Lincoln, while he may have had an opinion here or an opinion there with regard to slavery, his goal was to preserve the Union And it is said that he would have preserved the Union by allowing slavery, by abolishing slavery, or by allowing some slavery and abolishing certain slavery. Either way, all President Abraham Lincoln wanted to do was preserve the Union. And it just so happens that the military strategy that would have benefited the Northern Union states in this Civil War would be to free slaves from the Confederate states. So this was a matter of military necessity, as is said in the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay. And the Union troops, they were tasked or responsible with passing this freedom message. So the Union troops, they continue to pass this freedom message, the Emancipation Proclamation, to every Confederate territory they were able to pass it on to during the war. The Emancipation Proclamation allowed former slaves and free Blacks to join in the military, join and fight into the military, which resulted in to roughly 180,000 to 200,000 African Americans fighting as Union troops during the Civil War, 90K of which were former slaves. And of course, we know that some Blacks were kind of forced to fight on the Confederate side as well, but it wasn't because they had full knowledge of what was going on.
Yeah. So with the involvement of the Union troops fighting against the Confederate troops, by the time we hit 1865, specifically April was a pretty eventful month. April of 1865, specifically April 9th of 1865, is when the military leader of the Confederate Southern troops, General Robert E. Lee, surrendered at Appomattox, Virginia, April 9th in 1865, and that effectively ended the war. And so in ending this war, the Confederates, represented by their military leader, General Robert E. Lee, they were no longer going to be actively fighting, shooting, and actively resisting the Northern Union troops. And so now, while the Northern Union troops are continuing to move across the geographical space of the South, now they're not only passing this freedom message embodied or enumerated in the Emancipation Proclamation to contested territory, now they're passing the freedom message to a territory that is conquered because they were victorious, having just received the surrender of General Robert E. Lee. President Abraham Lincoln, not 7 days later, not even a full 7 days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered, President Abraham Lincoln was shot on the evening of April 14th, 1865. And the morning of April 15th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln, he died. And so within a week's time, the Civil War had ended because of the Confederate surrender, and the president of the Union troops, the president of the United States, had been assassinated just 7 days after that surrender. So it was a very eventful April and during 1865.
Okay, so now we get into a little bit of where Juneteenth comes from. So 2,000 Union troops marched into Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865. And they went there, of course, as we said earlier, they were spreading the freedom message. So they were passing the message of the presidential decree and freeing 250,000 Texan slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation only listed states in the rebel South, and it didn't really apply. It didn't apply to slaves in the North, nor those slaves in the states that would border those rebel states. So there could have been possibly slavery still going on in those northern states and those border states, but it was all nullified with the 13th Amendment that outlaws slavery as a nationwide policy. It was ratified in December of 1865. And that 13th Amendment reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." And that's the 13th Amendment that nullifies slavery as a nation, for the nation.
Now, as my wife has said, the 13th Amendment it was ratified. Let's say it went through all the governmental processes, had to go through the House, the Senate, and of course, through the executive branch, but it was ratified in December of 1865. To backtrack back to Juneteenth of 1865, what we're looking at is in excess of 2.5 year period where the slaves, especially in the state of Texas, but in Confederate space, in Confederate geographical territory, were still enslaved, even though the president of the Union, the elected president of the United States, had written in the Emancipation Proclamation that slaves in Confederate states were free. And so this is what Juneteenth comes to, hold gravity. It is that while slavery had been, taken off the table for these slaves in the Confederate states, there were some in Texas that didn't receive the word until 2.5 years later. And part of the understanding and the push is that the day the last slave, or those slaves that heard about it last in Texas, were informed and thereby freed from that information, that's the day we're going to celebrate freedom. And that's why Juneteenth, June 19th of 1865, is called the Freedom Day. Now, Juneteenth was a Texas state holiday in 1980. Now, the rest of a good number of the rest of us really didn't get a hold to Juneteenth until around 2021, when it became a federal holiday. But these are some of the things surrounding Juneteenth. We just wanted to share with you, inform you, so you knew what the holiday was about from a historical standpoint and its historical significance. God bless you all. Let freedom ring.